I'm David Britton from the Ava Gallery. Well, the concept of the exhibition is that 20 years ago, Dr. Brian Kennedy published a book called Irish Art and Modernism, which was a groundbreaking book at the time, and that was accompanied by an exhibition at the Hugh Lane Gallery and it came up to the Ulster Museum. So it's exactly 20 years this year since that exhibition. So we thought we'd re-look at it. Some of the pictures, including the Christopher Campbell and the Charles Lamb, were included in that exhibition. But we've tried to encapsulate as much of the original exhibition as we can. There are 49 artists represented. Each artist is represented by one, hopefully, iconic type work. The main picture in the exhibition, picture that I sort of structured the whole exhibition around, was this iconic work by Mainie Jellett. It's called Homage to Fra Angelico. It was the very first modern picture that got acceptance by the likes of AE and the critics in Dublin. Up to that point, works by Evie Hone and Mainie Jellett had been ridiculed in the press. So it's a very important work, and both in scale, and it shows very much the influence of Albert Glaze on her work, and they were working very closely together at that time. So where the exhibition really starts is with Orpen and Orpen's pupils. Now, this work of Dolly Siles was in the Siles family until very recently. She originally was posed, it was painted up in Dillon in East Lothian in Scotland, and it was painted to celebrate her 21st birthday. She was originally posed with a little posy of flowers in her hands, but she absolutely hated. And so she was actually a scratch golfer and actually taught Orpen how to play golf. So they quite nicely went and have changed it and put the golf clubs on her back. But this has never ever been publicly exhibited before. So what's nice is that there are some things that are in private collections that people never see, and then there's some old familiar friends like the John Luke, which has been here and have been in various exhibitions before. So where we start with Orpen, and then we show some of Orpen's pupils, who would include Estella Solomons, which this work is part knasilla from 1911, very reminiscent of what Orpen would have been doing himself on the Hill of Howth. And it's interesting in some ways that the females seem to have adopted modernism much quicker than the males. We've got Lady Gilnavy and also Caroline Scully. Now, these are very modern works, really, compared to his other pupils, and the most well-known of his pupils would be Sean Keating, who always maintained this very academic method of painting. So here we have on the Quay in Ireland, which probably dates from the early 1940s, and he always, throughout his life, you can see Orpen's hand in his teaching. Now we move along and we go into the traditionalists. So we have some very good examples here by the northern traditionalists. The wonderful, iconic work of the Jaunting car by William Conor. Now this is the original work for the work there's a similar work in the Ulster Museum, but this was the very first one. And Brian Kennedy would suggest that a better example than the one that's in the Ulster Museum. Well, we also have very fine examples of work by McKelvey. This one is of Woodville Park in Belfast, and a lovely work down the west of Ireland in Killary Harbour by James Humbert Craig. And just before we leave this room, I think what's quite interesting is the Harry Clarke with the stained glass panel. It's called Bluebeard's Wife, and it's actually mounted in a cabinet made by James Hicks. This has been chosen to represent Ireland on a new stamp being published by Poland. And it's very unusual to see a small piece of glass by Harry Clarke in private hands. We've got this very iconic piece by Paul Henry of the windswept trees, which it dates from before 1920, from the late 1910s, and a very modern piece by his wife, Grace Henry, again from between 1910 and 1915, but quite modern really in its application of paint and showing very much her training that she had received in France. Paul Henry and his wife were the founder members of the Dublin Painters Society in the 1920s in Dublin, and it was really the first introduction of modernism into Ireland. Rare works would include works by Joan Jameson, who was very much part of the Dublin Painters. A very small little work, but quite a nice little attractive work by Lillian Davidson. Now this used to belong to the painter Anne Yeats, who would be W.B. Yeats's daughter. and it was acquired directly from her. That's been included in the likes of the Irish Women Artists exhibition back about 20 years ago in the National Gallery. So the founder members of the Irish Exhibition of Living Art would include, again, Mainie Jellett, who was the chairman. The first exhibition was in 1943, and unfortunately she died the following year, but she was the very first chairman. Her place was taken by Norah McGuinness, and we've quite a fine example of Norah McGuinness's work here. Children on a Road. Other people who exhibited with the Irish Exhibition of Living Art would include the likes of Elizabeth Rivers, whose work you don't really see very often. Again, this would be quite an iconic work. Gerard Dillon, represented by the card players, who's called Tea Break. And then quite an unusual painter whose work you don't come across very often is Thurloe Connolly. Now, he exhibited from the very first Irish Exhibitions of Living Art in 1943. What's interesting about this exhibition is some of the artists that are included here are also included in the Surreal and Irish Art down at the F.E. McWilliam Museum. So we would have very much works by Colin Middleton and John Luke and Neville Johnston and F.E. McWilliam would be included in both shows. So it would be nice if people could actually see both exhibitions.